guys, welcome to a new episode of our podcast. We're thinking of talking about yamas and yamas today, which might be a new concept for people listening. I can tell you from my experience, it's not a new concept, but I know almost nothing about these. Lucky to have Monica with us to talk about these some more and actually teach me a bit as well, about what they mean and yeah, how we can use them in yoga and outside yoga as well, right?
Well, you can practice yoga without knowing what the yamas and the niyamas are. That's the good part. You can just practice several limbs of yoga or just one, or it's quite a challenge to to have them all of them in mind at the same time. But I'd say the yamas and the niyamas as limbs of yoga help us be but not to be better or truer yogis, but they really help us grasp a fuller meaning of what yoga is. And the benefits that are derived from them are also palpable and can be reflected in various other parts of our lives, apart from just the yoga practice. So the yamas are some sort of social restraints, like a moral code, and they're about self-control and self-regulation, and they're there to free ourselves from falling victim to our own human impulses. And they also harmonize us with the others and with the environment we live in, within the society we live in. There are five. They're Ahimsa, Asteya, Aparigraha, Brahmacharya, and Satya. I enumerated them and we'll go quickly through both the yamas and the niyamas, but we'll focus on just one yama today. And I wanted to also say a few words about the niyamas. The niyamas are the duties that are directed towards ourselves, inner observances, guidelines, or tools to cultivating happiness and self-confidence. And the yamas are what harmonizes us with ourselves, with our own self. Saucha, Santosha, Svadhyaya, Ishvara Pranidhana, and Tapas. Focusing some more on the yamas, I can just quickly mention what all of the five of them mean, and then we'll focus on just one and have a larger discussion about that. So Asteya is non-stealing, Aparigraha is non-possessiveness, Brahmacharya is continence, although this is, of course, debatable. The Sanskrit language is so rich in meanings that we can interpret every word in multiple ways according to that context. And Satya is truthfulness, always telling the truth. And the one that we will approach today is Ahimsa, which is non-violence. Probably it's a good idea to explain the etymology of the word. So himsa is injury or harm, and there's this prefix a, and together they mean non-harming or non-violence. Ahimsa. That's how it goes. What have you perceived Ahimsa to be from your practice, Alex, or what have you heard of it?
Yeah, so as I was saying, I have very limited knowledge about these. I've heard of them, and actually, the only one that I've heard of more, so to speak, is Ahimsa. And as far as I understand it, and you've just kind of mentioned, it is this non-violence towards, and I guess you can apply it towards every aspect of your life, right? So towards your thoughts, towards your body, towards others, towards your diet, towards yoga, I guess, towards physical practice, and how you know apply it in each area differs a bit, but it's always the same theme, right, throughout. Being kind to yourself, I guess, being kind to others, um, being kind to your thoughts. This is kind of how I understood it, and how I, let's say, try to practice it. Sometimes it's hard, but yeah, that's at least my limited, I guess, knowledge and experience on this.
It coincides with my limited experience and understanding of it, but I think it's definitely what yoga wants us to understand out of Ahimsa. And we have to be mindful about its versatility and try to live with these guidelines, with the yamas and the niyamas. And indeed, we should be applying them to all aspects of life. We can dig deeper into some and into how we do that. For instance, what we should be understanding is, so like that's why I wanted to highlight where the word comes from, because we should cultivate the opposite of violence, injury, aggression, or being aggressive. So basically, the complete opposite would be unconditional love, or a love that's full of respect for everything that exists. So yoga says that we should be manifesting this in what we tend to do, in our actions, and in our thoughts as well. And of course, probably the closest one where we can apply ahimsa quite easily, and it's crucial that we apply it there. It's the self and the relationship that we have with ourselves, I would think. And we can do that in multiple ways, from being more lenient to ourselves, not pushing too hard, um, not scolding us when we made a blunder or a mistake, not feeling bad about ourselves when we screwed up for once, and focusing rather on the learnings from that experience rather than reprimanding ourselves because we were such a disastrous human being, and we took disastrous actions towards a disastrous goal. So treating ourselves with kindness and truly seeing ourselves in a positive light is for sure living ahimsa and enjoying yoga how it was meant to be. Have you I'm just wondering whether you've had any. How do you traditionally look at yourself? Are you the type of person that um, tries to that's not, when an unhappy circumstance arises, you start scolding yourself, or do you treat yourself with kindness? What's the first instinct? What do you go to?
Yeah. So as I was just saying, it is sometimes hard, and I will say that I guess most of the time my first instinct is actually, or my first thought is actually not a good one towards myself. And that whole saying everywhere on the internet these days, it's like, um, would you speak to your friend as you talk to yourself, right? And if you
Ouch.
wouldn't, right, then reconsider.
Mhm.
So I try, to sometimes be like, consciously, okay, you're not, the biggest failure, whatever the thoughts are at that point, and everybody makes mistakes and all those things. And sometimes it works better than other times, I'd say. So I don't think I mastered it, because I'm quite self-critical. um but I guess I've improved at least. And yeah, I kind of tend to think either of the, friend sort of speaking part, or just in general, hey, we're all humans, we all make mistakes, that's how you learn. It's not the end of the world, all of those things. So yeah, it's a challenge every time. But also what I wanted to kind of add to this, so outside, let's say, being self-critical about myself, which is kind of self-critical in in a nutshell, but the the thing with, having these negative thoughts, um I would extend this, not having these negative thoughts about others as well, because outside of just that potentially, um, I don't know, getting you into actions that maybe you regret later, or words that you
Mhm.
say to other people that maybe you regret later. It also, I don't think, makes you feel good anyway. So, like, if you're jealous or angry or
Mhm.
resenting someone, it will influence your mood as well. And that's not to say that you're always like rainbows and sunshine, but um, it's that thing, again, that we always hear. It's like, a thing, a situation is just a situation. It doesn't. All it matters is how you react to it. So you give it meaning. So then, if you can give it less of a negative meaning, that will benefit everyone. And there's actually been studies done that people that are tend to be more optimistic, I think, tend to live longer, actually. So yeah, if nothing else, at least that might convince you to try.
Yeah, or maybe optimists don't live much longer because they feel the need to take risks, and sometimes they make much more stupid mistakes than us pessimists. So I don't know. But yeah, circling back to the to harming one's own self, I sometimes have the tendency to be on self-sabotage. So to put it, so probably I realize that I'm progressing towards not self-sabotaging myself and not critiquing myself so much. The moments when the thought comes and I acknowledge it came. So then I tell myself, okay, you need to stop. You need to see things with more clarity, maybe, and stop having all these negative thoughts about yourself, and try to think of some occasions when I was more successful rather than a failure, as one would think in that circumstance, and it usually works. But being aware at the very moment that the bad thought about yourself happens, and stopping it, refraining yourself from putting yourself even, digging yourself even deeper in that negative thoughts, acknowledging that, I think it's super good because it shows you're aware, and being aware is already great. And
And challenging, though, right?
yeah, so very
As well.
challenging.
Yeah. But yeah, I totally get what you mean. And
Yeah,
the other thing that might help is also something that I'm sometimes trying to remember, is that, hey, you survived all the situations so far, and you are fine. You are fine. It's, like, you've survived everything and you're still here and you're fine. So
true,
yeah, so I think, and that
very
can
true.
also, yeah, this one can also help, or it helps me sometimes, in just, when I need to kind of deal with something uncomfortable that I know I'm not gonna like, or it's difficult, or I don't know what's gonna happen, or all those things. I'm like, okay, I made it through everything, so I'll make it through this.
Yeah, and this is when it comes to the relationship that we have with us, right? And my thoughts on non-harming the others, or cultivating the opposite of non-harming, for the others, is also a challenge. Probably, honestly, less of a challenge. But yeah, we tend to be judgy sometimes, and I get really annoyed when yogis tell me, or I see this everywhere. I consume too much content about yoga, I guess. And oh, don't judge. This is not yogic of you. It's everywhere, and it's super annoying because it's something that's so deeply us, I think. Not necessarily judging as in critiquing, criticizing others, but rather assessing them, evaluating them, putting those human beings in a context that pleases or displeases us. So I think this is something very natural. The problem is, what do you do with it? What do you do with the consequences of it? Will you still insist? Will you continue the harm and the violence? Or would you stop? So I don't think this is an unnatural behavior. That's how I see the situation. But I think the wisdom of understanding that it's no point in judging others comes a little bit later in life when we have the tools to understand this. Namely, accepting that we're so different. And when we think the judging thought, and when we judge others, we literally have no idea about their context, their situation, their story, their day, what made them react that way, and so on and so forth. And obviously, we tend to react instinctively. And to put that thought, oh, he's like this, then if she said that, then it means she must be like this, and so on and so forth. And it's the thoughts ruminate, and it's an endless loop of judgment. But yeah, we don't know much about what we see at that point, right? We don't know what was behind. We don't.
Yeah, and actually, this one makes me makes me think of one book I've read that you might have also heard of or read, because it was I guess super popular, which is *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*
Mhm.
by Yuval Harari. I guess it's how you pronounce his name. And in there, he was actually suggesting that as humans, as species, we developed speech to be able to gossip. So so if you think like that, then you know that's how we evolved. We needed to gossip, we needed to judge. And that's how we formed the tribes and everything and the connections. So yeah.
Like I said, assessing and evaluating most of the times rather than just criticizing. So,
Yeah, I mean, gossip can be many things. But yeah, it goes way back in our DNA, basically.
yeah, we have a knack for that. The point is to manage it well, and if we are to refer back to an actual yoga practice, namely asana practice, the physical side of practicing yoga, practicing ahimsa here, I believe, is extremely important because as a consequence of joining group classes, for instance, we tend to evaluate our practice in comparing it with the others' practice, the co-participants at that specific class. And generally, we are not the winners, right? So I always tell, my students that, especially the beginners, there's no point in looking at other people in the room, and specifically because this will always reflect back badly on your own practice. You will be intimidated, and maybe you're practicing next to a ballerina or I don't know, a yogi who has been practicing asana for 20 years, and this can be really, really off-putting. And all we tell ourselves at that point is, oh, I'm never going to be able to do that. This will never work out for me. How do I get better at this? As if yoga is about getting better at yoga. No, it's not about that. How much time do I need to build my to build that body that they are building to build that pose that they are building with their body with my own body? How much time when am I getting there? And then they ask the teacher these questions. So yeah, no harm also means have patience with our own practice and not push ourselves too hard, I would say.
Yeah, it's accepting ourselves, right, at that very moment and at each moment, basically. So no matter how strong or flexible or whatever we are at that point, right, and not pushing ourselves over the edge. That is kind of practicing, I guess, ahimsa in yoga, and I guess also in general in any sort of physical practice, right, or physical
Yeah, of
endeavor.
course, because if you think, obviously we don't do that, but if we stopped a minute and thought, hey, when was I ever perfect? Whenever I started something new, there's absolutely no way you can get the knack of things and understand what's going on and what you should exactly be doing this has happened 0 cases in the history of us starting a new activity. So when you're new at yoga, you just have to show up and practice, and that's the key to progress, if you want to call it progress, because showing up and practicing literally improves. They say, how do we say this in English? I have it in Romanian right now, so I will need a few seconds to gather my thoughts. Any quantitative work will add to the qualitative outcome. So if I come times enough, if I participate at enough classes, inevitably I will end up getting better than when I had my first class, right? It's only logical. So
Yeah, consistency is a
yeah,
key.
just come.
But what I would say is also, when are we ever perfect?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I don't think
And we
anything is ever perfect. So
yeah, let's
yeah.
not aim for that. Let's not aim for that. It's stupid to aim for that. And let's just enjoy the process, and progress will come. It's that simple, I think.
Yeah, and I think aiming for perfect or aiming for perfection kills pretty much everything, because you're never gonna get there, and basically you're never gonna
Achieve.
necessarily achieve much, because you're always trying to get to a place where you're never gonna get, so you're gonna get frustrated
Yeah,
and maybe give up. So
yeah.
I always try to, for myself, basically remind myself that good enough is good enough.
Good
It
enough is
doesn't need
better
to be
than
perfect.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. um so but it takes practice, and sometimes you just get sucked into this, like, oh, it needs to be like this. Okay, I don't like this detail. And at least for me, and it sometimes takes longer to realize, to be like, oh, okay, I am way deep into something that it doesn't even matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I
that's
should
not the
just do
point.
this, or just get it over with. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the point. But of course, there's the other side of things. When we practice asana in a group setting, it's also the teacher, isn't it? And in my view, the teacher should also practice ahimsa when they relate to their students, to their class participants, because sometimes teachers have the tendency to push people a little bit too hard, or use words that are a bit off-putting for some people, while for others they might be motivating, such as challenge. Like, for instance, if I have a, I don't know, not a difficult pose, not a hard pose, but maybe a pose that's not very accessible to different bodies, to different people, right? And then some teachers say, okay, so they show a first variation, which is easier and more approachable, more doable by different bodies. And then they continue by not saying the full pose looks like this. And here's what we should be doing to reach the full pose, the final pose, right? And instead of saying that, they just cue challenge. and and then they perform the asana, right? So as a practitioner, I'm not a big fan of that, because maybe I don't feel like challenging myself today. Yeah, it was just an example. Also, something very serious and that might be very harming is physical adjustments. We have a full episode on that, you guys. So have a look at our YouTube channel and watch it as well. Um, I love doing adjustments during classes. I think it's important. I'm one of those teachers that really enjoy doing that. But with experience, we come to understand the limits. And we gain this refinement as teachers, or ideally we should get we should earn it, we should gain it, so as to understand when to stop. And I know that in your practice, Alex, you prefer to, you prefer to not necessarily not be touched, but rather, you know, um, be approached carefully, right, in terms of physical adjustments. But yeah, so this is important, because a little gesture or whatever pressure we apply when adjusting might do more harm than good. So we always need our full attention, and of course to practice ahimsa when we teach yoga.
Yeah, and I would imagine, though, that the yoga teachers are aware of these way more than the yoga students, and they would practice or try to practice them in their lives. I don't know if that's a high expectation on my behalf, or if not a high expectation, but it's just not necessarily the case.
I would say they are more informed by yoga practitioners. The teachers are more informed and more educated and more knowledgeable. But yeah, ultimately they're human beings. So I don't know. I guess it varies from person to person.
Yeah, I guess it also could it depend. I'm assuming on the trainings they've had, right? Because maybe some don't really focus on these. I know there's different like yoga teacher trainings. Some focus more on the anatomy, or some focus more on the spiritual. I think, right? So it depends also on the trainings maybe that you've done, and maybe your own research, I'd assume.
Yeah, true, true. Although these are the very basics of yoga, right? The eight limbs. But for sure, some teacher trainings prefer to focus much more on asana practice, let's put it that way, rather than the other aspects of yoga. Um, I mentioned at the beginning that practicing the yamas and the niyamas, and in this specific case, practicing ahimsa helps us have a better life, or at least being aware of what we should be doing. And I'd like to highlight the practicing of ahimsa when it comes to nature. Yeah, obviously, we shouldn't litter, leave our trash when we go into the woods or in parks or something. But what I wanted to insist a little bit more upon is our relationship with animals, because, of course, this is a never ending discussion and I will not go full in. But I just like to highlight that practicing ahimsa also means not harming animals, not using their body parts, not eating them, and generally not being violent towards animals. Obviously, this is not to say that, oh, if you're not a vegan or a vegetarian, you're not a true yogi. I don't believe that at all. Um, it's just that more care is needed. And I think if we try to live on the yoga side of life, we should at least have a discussion with ourselves and really understand how we feel about this. And at the end, you know, be confident of our choices and live up to whatever we chose. Yeah, I'm gonna still eat meat, or no, I will not eat meat or any animal products at all, or not wear leather or whatever. Whatever choice we do, we should just stick by it and not be embarrassed to talk about it. Whatever choice that is. But yeah, the discussion needs to be had, I think, with
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah, but absolutely. And I think, if we go back to what ahimsa really is, which is basically not harming any, living thing, right? Um, we need to ask ourselves these questions, to your point. But I think then we also need to think of us as the as the living thing as well, right? So if, for instance, what I mean by that is, if being a vegan is actually something that harms you for whatever reason, right? Maybe you have some intolerances or some allergies. If you have, I don't know, allergies to nuts and other things, or they just don't sit well with you, that's probably not going to be a good time for you necessarily to be completely vegan, as far as I'm aware from my research into it. So basically then it's that thinking, right? Okay, I don't want to hurt any living thing, including myself. So how can I find the balance between the two? So maybe I eat vegan or vegetarian a few times a
Mhm,
week, right? Or maybe,
mhm.
so you find ways that you can, limit the violence and the suffering on any living thing as much as possible, and live in harmony with yourself and nature and the other species, basically, and the animals.
Yeah, I absolutely support your thoughts. Um, and us talking here only demonstrates how how widely we should be applying Ahimsa um, when it comes to food and eating and nurturing our bodies. Wow, there are so many schools of thought out there, and there are infinite studies and tons of scientific literature about the lack of protein and or vice versa, about the harm meat does to us, and so on and so forth. Um, I have three more points to make here. One is my personal experience. I'm a pescatarian. I don't eat red meat or chicken. I only eat fish and seafoods. But I do eat cheese and eggs very rarely. But yeah, I'm a huge cheese lover. I don't drink cow's milk or any other animal milk at all. It's not very good for me and for my body. But I decided to not eat meat after I had completed my yoga studies, because if you study yoga at a deeper or at a more professional level, if you want to become a teacher, that is, you find out all sorts of things, and then you end up changing your life from some perspectives. So that was my first motivation, right? My initial motivation. But then so I stopped, and then I tried to have some meat here and there every once in a while, and every time I did that, I was a mess. My digestion was terrible. I would be extremely tired, and it was clear that my body doesn't want to go back there any longer. So in my case, it was exactly like you're saying, right? I made a choice to not be harming myself and to be well. So for me, that's how my eating habits look like. Um, I wanted to touch upon there are always there's this culture that always impresses me a lot, because it's pretty impressive. The Native American culture, um, they use animals, they use everything, and they have all of these. So they just don't just eat something and then throw the rest of it away, right? They use the skins and the fur and all of that. But um, they have special ceremonies and rituals where they thank nature and thank animals, that they are sacrificing themselves for the humans, and that they are offering themselves, their entire bodies and beings for humans. So it's a thank you that they give. It's an honor, you know. So it's something that sounds very special to me and quite impressive.
Yeah, and whilst I think, what you're saying about this is better than what we're doing in the Western society, for sure, I would argue that again, it's better, and thanking animals, and using everything is definitely better. But I would argue, the animals didn't really want to sacrifice themselves, if that makes sense. So I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I guess from that perspective, it's a bit, I don't know what the word is, but it's definitely not the
Hypocritical?
case. Probably, yeah. I was gonna say that, because yeah, at the end of the day, no animal wants to die or wants to sacrifice themselves,
No being,
and
no
no
life
being,
being.
yeah. And we've established already that most animals, all animals, I guess, except for, like, I think, what was it, maybe oysters or mussels, anyway, they're all sentient, so they understand pain, they understand. So it's, yeah, that's what I would say to that. And then coming back to this, practicing nonviolence, non-suffering, um, this actually, I think, helps you in keeping more of a vegetarian or vegan overall way of living, um, versus maybe just the, let's say, health benefits. And I say this like this because it's like, again, it depends on your specific, allergies and all the things, right? So it might not even be that beneficial. But it's also the fact that if you compare, let's say, a mostly plant-based diet to a, Western diet, a standard
Mm.
Western diet, it's it's gonna be beneficial, right? It's gonna be so much better. But then if you transition from mostly plant-based, let's say, to completely plant-based, I don't think the benefits are that great anymore, if that makes
Significant.
sense. So
Hmm,
at
hmm,
some
hmm.
point, yeah, you kind of are, it's not going to be a big difference. So if your only purpose is just to use just for the health benefits, which is not bad, I'm not saying, but if it's just that, then I don't think, it's easy to just have a steak, have the chicken, right? Because it's um right, or going back to it, let's say. There's a lot of, and I don't want to go into this whole, it's a completely different topic and a tangent, but there's a lot of vegans that I've seen that went back to not being vegans, right?
Yeah,
And they
me too.
just, and I think that's most of the cases that I've seen is because they um yeah, it was more for the diet, and then there was another popular diet, and they tried the other diet, you know.
Yeah, me too. I've seen such cases, so you can see that the motivation where they started from was probably not a wise place to start from. It was just another dietary change. As far as I'm concerned, you know, I think if we're wandering alone in the desert and we get lost or whatever the hell, then that's the only excuse, you know. But otherwise, this is 2024, right? So there are so many options out there that actually eating meat seems to me not suitable anymore, honestly. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
I think there's still places, in the world where actually there's, so-called food deserts or things like that, where you can't actually, where people can't actually, afford um to not eat meat, to not eat animals, right? So if we're
yeah,
talking about, it goes
absolutely.
back to not causing harm to any living thing, right? If your only options are those and there's no other way to survive, of course you should do that. But if we talk about our, Western countries society, then yeah, there's so many options now, that um again, if you don't have like a specific, like different, I guess, health
Requirement.
conditions that,
Mhm.
yeah, prevent you completely from going completely plant based or vegetarian or stuff like that, then yeah, there's a lot of options. There's, you
So
can't
many.
really say
So
to
many.
survive. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We're not out there in the wild, so I mean, most of us are not. Um, and one final point I wanted to make when it comes to nonviolence towards animals is to say a few words about this religion called Jainism. It's an Indian religion. I mean, it's not an Indian religion. It's a religion that appeared many, many years ago, of course, in India. And it is teaching a path to spiritual purity and enlightenment through disciplined nonviolence, ahimsa, non-injury, right? To ahimsa to all living creatures. And in Jainism, this ahimsa is the standard by which everything is judged. So the practice of ahimsa actually obviously requires to not kill any sort of animal life, and harming any life form is the the utmost sin when it comes to Jainism, and it has negative karmic effects. This is what they claim, what Jains claim. So I'm bringing this up because, in fact, they're the purest religion when it comes to this. So they're way, way more keen on not killing animals than and being vegetarians, of course, way, way more than Buddhists or Hindus ever were. Yeah, so it's interesting, but in fact, they're not a huge percentage of the Indian population. They're a very low percentage. And of course, you can find this religion in other parts of the world where there's a large Indian population, such as Australia and UK and USA and Canada. And there are many Jains in Japan, I have come to find out. Yeah, just wanted to add this info.
Yeah, I've heard of the word, so that's kind of, but I didn't know much about it, so that's interesting to learn. And yeah, I knew it was India. I just didn't know it was just a specific, and yeah, all the things you've mentioned. So that's news, or more news, because as I said, my knowledge is quite limited in this.
Yeah, it's very interesting to learn where it applies, right? Because again, circling back to how we started the discussion, it should be largely applied in all aspects of life. And the final point I wanted to make, because this was not the final one, as it turns out, um, also it's best, if possible, we can stop any circumstances where ahimsa is not being applied, rather than just sitting silently on the side and just being a witness of a bad situation happening. Of course, ideally, circumstances permitting, we should stop that situation, because ahimsa is also about not allowing violent situations to happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's being a good citizen, but not necessarily just a good citizen. I guess a good human being, maybe. But yeah, it depends on the circumstance, of course. But I guess as long as you try to practice it, or have it in the back of your mind, um, you can assess the situation and see how you could help, right? Whether or not you're getting yourself involved directly, or
Mm.
you get support, call the police, whatever it is, but
Yeah,
not just ignore and pass by, basically.
yeah, yeah. Practice that loving kindness, as the Buddhists say, that loving kindness that is the absolute opposite of violence. Ahimsa.
Yeah,
Yeah.
such a short word for such a complex yeah, way of, not complex way of living, but such complexity, right, behind it, such a short word.
Yeah, I'll wait till you hear the others, because yeah, probably we will focus in some of our future episodes on other yamas and yamas for sure. It's very interesting.
Yeah, well, we plan to do all of them, so watch this space. um I guess this is our episode today, right? Thank you, Monica, for sharing your knowledge with us and me. And yeah, guys, thanks for making it this far. If you have, again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time with a new episode. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
thank you for the discussion. Bye, guys.